Hi, guys. I'm Tiffany Bradley, and this is Art Off Pause. We're a little bit late today. We're still figuring out the platform, and I think the platform has a little bit of tech gremlin when it comes to audio, but we are here with Kale Roberts, who runs or has co-founded Tailgate Projects in Florida. So super excited to talk to Kale about art, direct service, and queerness, amongst other things today. So our usual format is I will intro Kale. I'll talk a little bit about critical framing. Kale will introduce their work, talk about how the COVID crisis has impacted their process, and then we'll take questions from you guys. So if you're on YouTube, you can listen, but you can't add questions. If you're on Crowdcast, you can ask questions in the chat box here, or you can ask questions in the Ask a Question function underneath. So that's the quick and dirty of it. And I'm going to intro Kale just a bit. So I'm going to make me big and you little, Kale. Yep. Okay, so Kale Roberts is an explosion of queer sportsing energy with a laundry list of identities that informs their practice as a performance artist and sculptor with a social practice. Blasting out of Tampa, Florida, they activate space in an art as life practice. One mouthful of the South, a dollop of blind fandom, and an abundance of misinformed history. They are dedicated to creating new rituals and objects imbued with humor and sincerity. In 2016, Tailgate Projects was incepted. Driving this rainbow hatchback truck with teeth and collaborative flags flapping in the wind, it is their conscious choice to live in full visibility, combating toxic socialization through daily navigations. And when I started thinking about Kale's art from an art historical perspective, it took me a little while to sort of think through how their work reflected what I had seen and experienced. And I think in this moment, when we're dealing with a global pandemic, we necessarily think of the last global viral pandemic, which was the HIV/AIDS crisis. And I think a lot of the social networks and scientific networks that tackled that pandemic are being reactivated. But I also think that when we remember queer art history in America, thinking of that time is so keystone because there was a way in which ACT UP and allied collectives really used spectacle as a tool for social change and agitation. And so there are lots of ways of being in the world. But when we think of ACT UP and their die-ins or the AIDS quilt, it was really about making queer bodies visible to make sure that they had access to healthcare and access to services. And so I think there's, always a difficulty between being visible and invisible, and there are dangers in both. But I think that's a good place to start thinking about Tailgate Projects and Heels on Wheels. So Kale, I will turn it over to you and you can tell us about what you were planning, your tour, and how you guys are figuring it out now.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the tour that we were planning was to end in a biennial in LA. And so we were planning on taking the truck across the United States and kind of tapping into queer networks from Tampa, Florida, all the way out to California to do a loop down low to the south and then across maybe the middle of the states coming back so that we could hit different spots along the way. And we obviously had to put everything completely on pause for that. And I feel like it's been day to day kind of assessing how to proceed with a project that has such a social practice when the social engagement rules have changed. and what visibility means in a very invisible situation.
So
And
can we take a step back just for folks who aren't, who don't know about Tailgate Projects, who don't know about your radical
right,
hijacking, just
okay,
what that looks like in everyday pre-social distancing life?
right. So I have a truck that's a Nissan Frontier that has been completely remodeled. We started by working with a Milagros collective, and this is a full scale hand painted mural on the outside that is kind of inspired by Keith Haring, and is in a rainbow fade with glitter in the backdrop of it. Around the rims of the truck tires are casted giant teeth that are the rims of the tires itself. And then in the hatchback, there is a flag gallery that has 3 flags that rotate out every 3 to 4 months with different artists, both across the United States and globally. So we're just bringing in different queer perspectives and conversations about identity, and a lot of information on just fandom occupying space and what flag content means. And that truck is my personal truck that I drive around, but it also becomes a public platform. So where the flags are constantly and the truck is driving around, the interior of the space is also decked out with 5 different artists and doing detailed work on the dash that is by Jen Miller. The center console being by Neil Binder. And these are all just different collage and resin images that we've taken pieces out of the truck and put them back in. And so the back of the truck bed gets changed to become a performance space. So it has right now a spot to put a vertical dance pole in the back of it. And sometimes we'll set up and put a PA system and a bubble blower and drive down the street and have that as performance space. But it also works for tailgating and tailgating culture. So you have like the daily navigations where we instigate conversations in gas stations and parking lots and grocery stores, and drive-bys at stoplights. But then when the truck is parked, it can also open up to create a tailgate event and kind of occupy and take up a space in that sort of very rich Southern fandom that is tied to sports and Southern truck identity. And
So you're a Texan by nature, right? Like you grew up in Texas and you're now living in Florida.
yes.
So could you talk a little bit about why you're using a truck, why you're looking at tailgating culture specifically, and how this is a different access point than doing gallery work? And I didn't say this, but I know that Kale actually has an MFA so Kale, has been trained in like a way that could lead to gallery or museum work. But this is a really more community engaged point.
There's a lot of service that's in my work, and I try to put the pieces together from, I played soccer all through college. And that's actually what put me in El Paso for 7 years, which was the best thing that could have happened to me, having grown up in between Dallas and Austin, and then put in a city on the border and dealing with the border issues that were there. But playing sports through college, there is huge tailgating culture, and there's also huge imbalances. So when I was playing sports, I was on a women's soccer team. And then even though our women's soccer team was doing the best out of all the sports teams at school, the highlight is still football. Identity tied to football and bodies, and a lot of disposability with bodies in sports. And there's a lot of toxicity that comes out of sports culture, but I do find that I still have a deep love of some of those elements. It's like I don't like a lot of the South, but I love Southern hospitality. And I don't like the misogyny and the disposable bodies that come out of sports culture and blind fandom that comes out of that. But I think as a community ritual, tailgating is really rich, that there is a need for people to come together and taking that kind of history and then going and getting my MFA and going to institutions and galleries and stuff, there's such a disconnect. These worlds that were like being an artist and being a sportster never had a lot of overlap. It was like Matthew Barney was my access point for that for a long time. And then Castles was the next access point as far as like large artists representing sports culture and art. And so then you throw in queer on top of that. And it's all these fringe things that were just floating around together. And there is a service in sports as providing community, as providing something to, I remember being on the field and stop like in the middle of a game that I had won an award and thinking, what am I doing kicking a circle up and down a rectangular field? And who are these people like cheering for me? Like I don't. And so trying to understand this disconnect between these spaces, but a deep need to be connected to something, to feed an identity that you want to build. And I think a lot of that comes into my work and wanting a social practice and an identity, and something that even the pandemic has been highlighting a lot amongst all of the work, including Tailgate Projects, is loneliness.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like teamwork is a through line between sports culture and Tailgate Projects, that really having this space where you can convene people and work together in some way is a commonality.
And that's why I think there's such a collaborative, like Tailgate Projects is its own project, but it is also part of my practice because collaboration has worked its way through my entire career, through everything that I've done. And I think that that is coming out of a sports mentality of like team mentality with it, without so much of the toxicities, even though we bring our baggage in and have to deconstruct.
Absolutely. So tell us about Heels on Wheels. And
so Heels on Wheels has kind of shifted a little bit, only because we haven't been using the truck as much for performative dance. So movement is really tied into queerness, because in the way that I use the queer's definition, because that could be an entire like week-long podcast itself, but it's something that's constantly challenging itself. It's in movement. The definition is expanding and questioning, and it is inclusive of many things, not exclusive. So it has the and also. And I am a huge rollerblader. And so parts of what Tailgate Projects is, by being this mobile exhibition space, this smoke cloud in a sense, I've been doing some smaller performances doing that on my rollerblades, and kind of going through neighborhoods with music and dance on my rollerblades. And so these has kind of been a little bit of the Heels on Wheels for that, because of dance and the pole being in the back of the truck and that being tied to truck culture and stuff in a different context. We've been doing that with, as far as the Heels on Wheels experience. And then the other part of what we've been doing with Tailgate Projects is like continuing to use the truck for Meals on Wheels. So ways in which, like, what are our constraints as an artist? It's like, what are our constraints? Well, the constraints are, unless it's absolutely necessary or essential business, we need to be at home. Well, Meals on Wheels is an essential business that we've already been part of. And so taking that truck out to do that and have those conversations, and just the joy that it brings to folks that are very isolated right now, that are already that are already an invisible community, then get to see something more visible come out, have a conversation. And it usually starts really beautiful combos with the people that I get to deliver to, or the people that are in proximity to that also. And so we've done the Meals on Wheels with the truck, and then there's our daily navigations to grocery stores and things of that nature. So I think it's easy to get in a routine now to where to have your sweatpants on and not, like, let the hair go crazy. But I feel like going out still becomes a performance, because we're entering this truck that has its skin, that has this sort of a truck and drag, brings us to be the same thing. Like, I think all three of us at the household got together and got dressed up the last time we went out in the truck to go grocery shopping. And then the other thing that the truck is kind of connecting is figuring out ways of past projects and how they apply to current projects. So I've been working with photographers online and also with another photographer that's local, and bringing up past work to figure out why we did some of that stuff that we've never published that ties into loneliness and isolation. So this photographer is going back and like looking in these archives of work that we've collaborated on but never put out because we didn't understand the content. And right now, amongst the loneliness and isolation, I think they just, Selena Roman is the artist, just put a post up on their Instagram that was like, I just needed this because I needed to laugh because I wanted to smile. And it was, she had put me in the sequin fringe outfit, and we went and drove around to find a spot to do a photo shoot with the truck and to dance on the back of the truck. And it's not even an image of me with the truck, but I'm shaking, it's like an endless shake. Endless shake, right? And so like there's like finding happiness and finding laughter amongst this because things are very intense, and like, you know, managing all of those feelings. And so I work with my roommates in the back as well, using the truck. Yep. They run Food Not Bombs and another nonprofit. So as they're bringing in things, I get to filter that over to Meals on Wheels and facilitate that. And then connecting, like I was a bartender. I'm tied into the restaurant industry and how heavily that's been impacted right now. And there are certain restaurants and places that I know that are open. And so tying that, you know, Bacon Babes is a bakery who's been donating cookies that I can then bring to Meals on Wheels, that I can bring to these different spaces, that I can bring to Food Not Bombs. And so that I feel like is the way that it's been transitioning as far as the practices, because the truck is already a social catalyst, and it is important to have conversations with folks that don't otherwise go to the gallery. But I think right now that conversation is almost on pause a little bit, and the art can be a catalyst of just a smile, just an eagerness for people to want to connect and wave eagerly and have that. And I think right now that means that I have to rein in some of those things where it's like sew masks, make hand sanitizers for the homeless, just, you know, help to distribute those. And those, I feel like, where it becomes Heels on Wheels and art on wheels in a different way.
Yeah. And it sounds like all of your community has mobilized really deeply
Right.
to support each other. And I think you raise, I'm gonna make us equal right now. There we go. That you raise a great point in terms of how a lot of artists are affected by this crisis, in that a lot of artists are independent contractors or tied to the service industry, either in hospitality or as event planners, as these jobs that can often be flexible in a way that supports art making. And so as all of those sectors have been shut down, and a lot of them aren't W-2 jobs, our community is scrambling, you know, not just to make art, but to make rent or to make food.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's an idea that art and artists are of a certain class or having certain privileges. And that's true for some people, but definitely not all in our sector. So we're at about 20 minutes. So audience friends, please ask questions for Kale if you have them. I always have questions, so I can keep talking. But please let us know if you have questions. I will ask, what will I ask? So how do you see your work as a continuation or disruption of queer art in America?
How do I see?
And this is just so
big. Don't go small.
I mean, we're trapped in our houses. What can we do other than think about the big questions?
Right. Well, I think a lot about queering architecture, and that has been a huge driving force of this truck. And I want to make sure to say, like, queer is not a sexuality and it is not a gender. It is a way of seeing, I feel like, and it's a way of being that is non-normative, in that it doesn't have a set of rules in order to run by. So it's not in a binary. And so when I say queering the architecture, part of the smoke signal is bringing in people and working with folks that don't look queer, that don't look like artists, that don't fit these packages of signifiers that we're constantly searching for in otherness. And I think that that is where that some of that invisibility comes. And I find that sometimes being as brazen as the truck is in its smoke signal, it does bring folks in to have conversations that I've had at where I've had people come out to me in cars that check myself and going, I would have never seen you in that context had you have not said something to me that makes me check myself. And so when I think about queering the space throughout the states after this, I think about continuing to make those bridges and continuing to be a platform that can elevate those folks that become invisible for one reason or another, because all of our identities are constantly getting muted because we're putting one thing forward and all of this gets hidden. And so there's constantly that perspective, and that's one of the driving forces that keeps me doing this in the service that it is. And I think right now in what's happening with the pandemic, I cannot stop thinking about loneliness and what it's felt to be lonely in the South, what it's felt to be lonely as an artist, what it's felt to be lonely in my own skin, and why that has driven a huge production in my practice, because connectivity and community and visibility and creating platforms helps alleviate that. And so that's what those two things, I think, going into the future of the post-pandemic, are going to be what's driving this.
And so that leads to my next question, which is, if we were like really thoughtful and really reflective in this moment where we can't do, what would you hope that we will do in the future as a society?
Who is the society?
Yeah. I mean, you can address that as you want, as artists, as community members. I'm actually going to editorialize a little bit while you think about that, which what you just said about sending out a smoke signal is, and queerness being more of an aesthetic than a set of rules, is just a really interesting reflection, because I think there's a way in which marginalized communities often end up policing themselves or policing each other. And so to think about how to not replicate those frameworks, I think, is something folks, whether it's people of color or LGBTQ folks or other communities, are always grappling with how to create that sense of cohesion and working together without having people feel like I'm not of the dominant culture, but I don't fit in here too.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think with my co-collaborator on this project, Co and I talk so much about body swapping. I know that if we're going to go big and think about things, I'm going to go outside of what science is possible, and that is to drive more empathy in the world. I wish that there was more possibilities of body swapping, because I feel like the hugest disconnect is an embodied experience sometimes. And when I'm confronted with someone that I've never experienced before, that is either I feel in opposition to, or that I feel threatened by, or that I feel called out by, or that I have to deconstruct something in myself, like, I think I've never been exposed to this before, or I never saw it that way. And I almost like internally wish, I'm just like, I wish I could just endlessly body swap to understand the vantage point and perspectives of other folks. And that's what I feel is incredibly lacking in such, like, it's just like these gaps. these gaps are folding. That's why I drive so far towards queer, because queer is so inclusive of these things. It's the closest I can get to an enmeshment of a better understanding. But that's my utopia.
Okay. Well, hey,
Yeah.
what? I mean,
Yeah.
go big or go home. We're all already at home, so go big.
Right.
Audience, now's your time for questions. Otherwise, we will do last thoughts. But this has been a great end to the week. I will say this has been the first week of Art Off Pause, and it has been an amazing experience talking to folks all over the country. So thanks to Lexa Walsh, Betty Yu. Let's see, Emma and Yao at the Smith College Museum of Art, Kim at the Chrysler Museum of Art, and now Kale Roberts of Florida. And it's also been great talking to folks who are not New Yorkers. I mean, I love New York, but it's been great to hear how folks are working across the country. So we're at about 25 minutes. Kale, any last thoughts or aspirations? I think we've covered a decent amount.
Right.
But yeah.
Stay connected in the ways that feel the best for you. Yeah. I mean, if it's mail, if it's taking walks, if it's in your garden that keeps you connected, if it's a cell phone conversation, just stay connected and think about, stay connected. That's all I can think.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of something, which is we are kicking off Ramadan for our Muslim friends. So Ramadan Kareem, if you are hangry in this first couple days, hangry in the pandemic, I hear that there are digital iftars going on where people are breaking the fast together online. So on that note, it's Friday. It's late lunch in the East, snack o'clock in the West. We'll see you next week on the internet. So have a great weekend, guys. And thank you so much, Kale.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.